Enterprise Britain, I think any culture, any society has entrepreneurial culture if they weren't suppressed. You find in America, for example, that the black American culture was for years, centuries suppressed. You find not as much entrepreneurial activity within that group of people as opposed to the Indian community or the Pakistani community. I think, fact is, we have an immigrant culture here, and they are the best entrepreneurs. Because entrepreneurship is about freedom, about the obsession of being free, about being master or mistress of your own, life and your own identity. Attached to that, a huge work ethic, which immigrant cultures have. My parents were, Italian economic immigrants, and life was no more complicated than love and work. And you worked from 10 years old, working our mum's calf, and so on and so forth. And so there is a culture here by nature of the entrepreneurial groups coming in. There is not a culture of really understanding creativity. And it's spoken about in 101 ways. But you can see it in the same sort of like homogenous retailing that's going on around. Everything is doing. We're all, the high streets are as boring as you can imagine. They're monuments, as is the malls, to non-communication. They're just one ubiquitous brand after another. And people are yearning for a different way. So I don't think we've got a culture that looks for the creative impulse and then finds it and shapes it in our educational system to becoming an honourable livelihood. We don't even have the word livelihood anymore. And enterprise, and we just have a look at these young kids of 16 years old and saying, these are business studies. They're only doing business studies so they don't want to do bloody physics. And the business studies are like the dodo. It's all financial science. And business is about trading. It's about buying and selling, and that great place where it gets together, where it's a market store or it's a shop in a high street. And it's also about services. In this country we don't have anybody that's saying, hey, we've got the oldest population in Western Europe. By the way, why can't we look at services and products that shaves away loneliness? Because that's a dilemma with the elderly. And any product or service that is up there to take this loneliness away, that builds community, I think will last forever. So we don't have that really open thinking. And I don't think we have access to money or investment in a way that, you're not stultified by yet another tax, another imposition. And also the guys who in the enterprise culture are boring. They don't need 60-year-old bank managers off on a sabbatical before they're fired, to go into the East End of London where these kids are wild and interesting and saying this is what you could do. You need more feral, you need more outland, you need more iconoclasts, you need more heretics in the business world. So it's a long-winded answer for saying, yes, it is an enterprise culture, but my God, they're not tapping into the real enterprise, which is in the areas that they're not looking at. It's a profession that is not trusted. That's number one. You talk to any 12-year-old kid and you ask them, do you want to be a prime minister? Do you want to be a politician? They're like, get a life. So they are not trusted, and that shapes the identity of them. They're seen as career politicians. They're seen as, they're not representative. They don't talk the language of the youth or the language of my language, or they have their own language, which is usually protecting their own personal interests, or if they're bigger and wealthier as politicians, they're protecting big business interests. There has to be a re-enchantment of politics in this country. It's got to be re-enchanted. There's got to be a way where the language and the behavior changes, and maybe what will help re-enchant the political system in this country is that we stop this damned two-party system, which is always forced to be confrontationalist. Instead, we had a system that said, well, why don't we look for the best politician that represents the best thinking in education, or the best thinking in healthcare, or the best thinking in social enterprises, or whatever, and have a government of thought leaders, and have a government where you've got true arts and design as important, and enterprise, looking at real enterprise. So I think the stuffiness of the government that's less important to me than the And then the evil inherent in so many governments, you know, by nature of their power, and their damned disinterest in what the public want. I guess we've certainly got a better system than the American system by far, because that is in bed with the big business, and mostly the is it called the extractive? No, what's the industry called? The extractive industries. I mean, ExxonMobil and so on. We've got a we've got a media that doesn't understand how to humanize a government and how to bring the best thinking through. We have the most exciting format of debate, which is in the House of Commons, but you've got to wait up to 12 o'clock at night to even see those debates. And then there's politicians that have never even made a statement in the 10 years they've been as a Member of Parliament. That would be interesting, to know who they would be and shame them. So I think, anyway, I go back to my thing. They should be. We've got to have. I'm not even interested in the two-party system. I think it's going the way of the dodo. I think real power is being devolved into the local, and seeing the grassroots movement. And you'll see it in the G8 conference. The concept, the notion of protest now is so exciting, and it's so creative. There's such a joy in dissent. You know, the moral voices are not the government, the big fat guys sitting around in the G8 in Glen Eagles, and the big businesses, you know, supporting or creating their territory. It's the voice of the moral voice outside saying that, we don't want this pomp, we don't want this ceremony, we just want, the voice of the voiceless. So I think we've got to change the system, but I don't know how that revolution it can be done. Maybe we can do it by a really smart way of shaming. That would be interesting. Shame the buggers. I mean, there's a wonderful example how India is brilliant at shaming their politicians. 50, I get this around your head, 50,000 peasant farmers got together in Karnataka, and they laughed for 24 hours. And that laughter for 24 hours destroyed the entire local government within 3 days. It just collapsed because they were fighting to claim their basmati rice, their neem oil, their mustard oil. They claimed it and didn't allow Rice Tech or Monsanto to take it away. That, to me, is the power of protest. I love that.